Plundered, Episode 4. Hitler's Museum That Was Never Built. The Linz Art Project. Adolf Hitler planned to build one of Europe's largest art museums in Linz, Austria. It would stand beside the Danube as the cultural centerpiece of a transformed city. Its galleries would contain paintings, sculpture, furniture, porcelain, tapestries, and decorative objects gathered from across Europe. The museum never opened. Its completed building never existed, but the operation created to fill it was real. Thousands of cultural objects were purchased, appropriated, photographed, cataloged, and stored for a future that never arrived. The museum remained a plan. The dispossession behind part of its collection did not. Linz was closely connected to Hitler's youth and to the personal mythology he created around his life. After Nazi Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, he imagined rebuilding the city as a center of culture and political power. Plans included theaters, a library, ceremonial buildings, public spaces, and an enormous museum. Before the First World War, Hitler had tried to support himself through drawings and watercolors. He was not a trained curator or professional art historian. After becoming dictator, however, he treated his artistic preferences as national cultural policy. The proposed museum would represent his version of European civilization. To assemble its collection, Hitler created a special commission known as the Sonderauftrag Linz, the Special Commission Linz. This was not an ordinary museum acquisition department. It operated inside a dictatorship at war. Its agents had access to state money, occupied art markets, confiscated property, and political authority. The commission located artworks, negotiated purchases, examined seized collections, and worked through professional dealers. It also arranged transport, photography, storage, and record-keeping. Hitler appointed Hans Posse to direct much of the operation. Posse was an experienced museum professional and director of the Dresden Picture Gallery. His expertise gave the project cultural authority. He traveled through Germany, Austria, and occupied Europe searching for suitable works. He examined collections, communicated with dealers, and recommended acquisitions. This is one of the most disturbing elements of the Linz project. Cultural plunder did not depend only on soldiers and politicians. It also required trained professionals. Someone had to identify the artist. Someone had to assess authenticity. Someone had to estimate value. Someone had to turn confiscated or coerced property into a museum record. After Posse died in 1942, Hermann Voss continued the assignment. The Linz collection was assembled through several different routes. Some objects were purchased through dealers. Some came from property placed under forced administration. Others were appropriated from confiscated collections. The existence of an invoice does not automatically prove that a transaction was fair. Researchers must ask, was the owner being persecuted? Could the owner refuse? Was the price fair? Could the seller access the payment? Had a Nazi-appointed administrator already taken control? Was the sale necessary to finance escape? A receipt records a transaction. It does not always prove freedom. Austria became one of the earliest major sources of cultural property for Nazi collecting programs. After the Anschluss, Jewish families were forced to register property and faced discriminatory taxation, forced administration, and confiscation. Major private collections became vulnerable. Objects from these collections could be divided among museums, government institutions, senior Nazi officials, and the Linz project. The movement of a collection was rarely simple. One painting might be selected for Linz, another might remain in an Austrian museum, another could be exchanged or sold, another might later be recovered but not returned immediately. The family name disappeared from public display. The inventory number remained. The Linz operation also benefited from occupied European art markets. Dealers in Germany, Austria, France, and the Netherlands located works and arranged transactions. Some operated in markets transformed by invasion and anti-Jewish persecution. In occupied Paris, the ERR processed art confiscated primarily from Jewish collectors and dealers at the Jeu de Paume. Photographs and registration records allowed senior Nazi officials to examine objects without seeing every painting in person. The Linz project and Hermann Göring's private collection were separate operations, but their networks overlapped. Both benefited from confiscation. Both used professional advisors. Both competed for valuable objects. The Nazi cultural system was organized but it was not one unified collection. Different officials, agencies, and dealers pursued different interests. The planned museum would not have presented a neutral history of European art. Its collection reflected Hitler's preferences and Nazi ideology. Old masters and traditional representational art were favored. Modern and experimental art was attacked as supposedly degenerate. The museum would have used art to present an approved version of history. Visitors would have seen beauty, craftsmanship, and cultural prestige. They would not have been shown the persecution, forced sales, and confiscation behind part of the collection. The artist's name might have appeared on the label. The dispossessed owner's name might not. Photographic albums became an important tool in the collection building operation. They allowed Hitler and his advisors to review artworks gathered or considered for Nazi collections. The photographs transformed confiscated objects into a catalog for selection. After the war, their purpose changed. Images once produced to administer plunder became evidence. Researchers could compare them with family photographs, dealer files, ERR records, Linz numbers, and Allied collecting point cards. The perpetrator's catalog became part of the restitution archive. Because the museum was never built, its intended collection had to be stored elsewhere. Altaussee salt mine in Austria became one of the most important repositories. Thousands of paintings and other cultural objects were placed inside the mountain. Not everything stored at Altaussee belonged to the Linz collection, but works connected to the project formed a major part of the repository. A museum intended to glorify a future Nazi empire ended the war hidden underground. During the final weeks of the conflict, explosives were brought into the mine. Local mine officials and workers acted to prevent the collection's destruction before Allied cultural recovery officers began the removal operation. After Germany's defeat, objects connected to the Linz project entered Allied collecting points, particularly Munich. There, specialists photographed, catalogued, and researched them. A single artwork might carry several identifying numbers, one from a family collection, another from the Linz project, another from a wartime repository, another from the Allied collecting point. Researchers compared those numbers with invoices, photographs, confiscation files, and claims from survivors. The planned museum was dismantled object by object. Some works were returned to countries and former owners. Others remained unresolved. The museum itself was never built, but thousands of people lost control of property connected to its collection building system. That is the real legacy of the Linz project. Not an empty museum, a vast archive of ownership questions. Who owned each object before the Nazi era? How did that person lose control of it? Was the transfer voluntary? And was the object ever returned? In the next episode of Plundered, we return to occupied Paris and focus on the woman who preserved evidence from inside the Jeu de Paume. Rose Valland could not stop the looting. She made sure it could be traced. This is Plundered, an investigation into Nazi looting and the search for justice.